You know, there's all these stories about, you know, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world.
Ајде, мајката!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
The socialist government of Macedonia, currently led by Citizen before 1991, the League of Communists of Macedonia, together with their senior partner, DUI, before 2001, the so-called National Liberation Army, are now in the business of dictating the price of bread in Macedonia. And they've done such a good job that, well, how to put this delicately, there are shortages of bread throughout the country. You can't make this stuff up. In other news, the corruption in DUI is so bad now that half the party's leadership want Deputy Prime Minister Artan Grubi thrown out of the party, while the other half point to the inscription on a Roman stone recently unearthed and claim that this inscription proves that Macedonia is historically Albanian territory. Again, you can't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, support for Macedonia's EU membership has dropped to a record low of 64%, while 65% of all citizens polled are against changing Macedonia's constitution to suit the churlish Bulgarians, who have yet another election next month. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the snow-covered Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Chelimanov from the ancient Dardanian capital of Skopje.
Which is, yes, you are referring, of course, to this Roman stone unearthed in... where was
Dardanian stone, not Roman. Dardanian.
Oh, sorry, Dardanian. Okay, yes. So a single word in Latin script now proves that you, Svetin, must leave. Well, maybe they'll let you stay.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they'll let you stay, but you know, you have to acknowledge that this territory is historically Albanian. You know, I live in Oro Valley, but Tucson, which is where I grew up, it's just south of here, essentially. We have Tucson has a mayor from the Democrat Party, she's extremely liberal. And when she does her public events, she usually starts with, but first we must recognize that we are on land that was historically Native American and was stolen from them, you know, and it's just kind of...
Yeah, land acknowledgement.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know what it's called. It's called foolishness, stupid. It's called moronicness. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's yeah. So that's what we got going on here with some of the. Actually, it is part of the DUI. One of the DUI factions that's claiming this now.
A bunch of them are claiming it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, actually, yes. And Alternative, was it Alternative that just left government, or yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're the ones who are now pointing and saying that Macedonia needs to have, you know, well, basically federalism and split up the country.
Yeah. A confederacy.
Confederacy, sorry, yeah, and split up the country in half. So that's what the Albanian leadership. I always want to make a point of saying that it's the Albanian leadership that's growing restless again, with some of them claiming that Macedonia is, you know, Albanian, and therefore, you know, that justifies their claims to do this, that, and the other. But then you've got Artan Grubi, who is the powerful, I guess he's the deputy prime minister. And I just saw this too. Let's see, we're recording this. This is episode 152 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. We're recording this on Friday, March 2. So he is enveloped in a number of corruption scandals, which is why part of his party wants him out. But now he's blaming... wait for it, Russia for his scandals. So apparently he is claiming that the Russians are involved because they're anti-Albanian, yada yada yada. So what do you make of it?
It's a huge mess in the Albanian camp, and this is the result of the Macedonian party in power, the nominally Macedonian party in power, SDSM, losing support among ethnic Macedonians, dependent on the Albanians to survive another day, and Now it's not enough for SDSM to make a deal with one large Albanian party, with DUI. The leader of DUI is aging, Ali Ahmeti. He's facing two factions in his own party fighting to replace him. These factions see that SDSM is desperate for votes in parliament, so they're trying to increase their price by negotiating not through Ahmeti but individually. So this is why between 2 and 3 members of parliament from DUI have declared that they are now out of the coalition, and they are trying to make new deals with the government to get new perks. So then SDSM, they had to bring in a larger coalition partner, the Alliance of Albanians, with 8 votes. This was supposed to put them well above the limit of half of parliament, 61 votes necessary to survive. They were supposed to have like 70 votes, but as they brought this party in, other parties started to issue demands. The smaller alternative party left the government. It is now attacking the government. So everybody's trying to get a better deal out of the government, and the situation is also heightening nationalism in the country. Even though, the SDSM rule is supposed to be, on paper, good for relations between Macedonians and Albanians. It's supposed to keep the Albanians appeased because they have so much more influence over the government now. They have huge ministries, departments, which they never had before, like the foreign ministry, the finance ministry. They only had it once, shortly. They have far more clout in public sector employment. Like even anecdotally, I was doing some bureaucratic work these days, and the institutions are chock full with Albanians, and not doing a very good job, by the way. I must say, they're running roughshod over SDSM and the country and the government. So on their way out, the alternative party, they issued a demand that there is a union of Albanian municipalities in Macedonia, so practically that a statelet is formed within Macedonia. The reason for this is that in Kosovo, which is apparently coming closer to an endgame with the US and several EU countries pushing strongly on Serbia to accept a deal with Kosovo and recognize Kosovo, what Serbia requested in exchange was apparently a lot of money, apparently a lot of influence in Serbian lands around it, like Bosnia, Montenegro, and they will definitely ask for influence over Macedonia, as a part of maybe realigning to the West, away from Russia, and giving away Kosovo. But they also want a small portion of Kosovo, the north of Kosovo, which is majority Serbian. So, and they would form like a Serbian statelet there, like the Serbian statelet in Bosnia, with its own president, its own parliament, its own executive competences in, water, sewage, electricity, education, healthcare. So practically a mini government. And now the Albanians are saying, okay, we want the same thing in Macedonia. There's way more Albanians in Macedonia than Serbs in Kosovo. We are 30% of the country, according to the disputed latest census. And we want a president, a government, parliament, a cohesive territorial unit, which is practically partitioning the country. And so this is an issue, this is something requested by the Alternative Party as it was leaving the government. This was also raised by the Kosovo Academy of Sciences, which issued a report a few months ago. We discussed this, in which they condemned Ali Ahmeti for not pushing strong enough for this idea. They couched it in the terms that, okay, if Ahmeti pushes for this more, then Serbia will, this weakens the Serbian case in front of the West. So Serbia cannot push for partitioning of Kosovo. So they say this will be like a tactical move. But in reality, if this happens in Kosovo, as it's on its way to happen, then the Albanians would clearly say, okay, we want the same thing in Macedonia, obviously. And then there is the Roman plaque that was discovered. I mean, it looks Roman. I don't think there was...
Dardanian.
Sorry? Dardanian, yeah. So the Dardanians, Dardan, it's a word in Albanian for pairs, and this was apparently a name of a tribe which lived in this proximity, and mainly in Kosovo. And the Albanians are building like a nation founding myth on the Illyrian tribes which existed in the Balkans, which lived in the Balkans before the Romans. So this is very important for them to state that they predated the Slavs, the Romans, that they were equal ageness with the Greeks. Even at one point they would claim like Alexander's mother, I think, was Illyrian or half Illyrian, half Illyrian, Olympia. So they would say, okay, the Macedonians are building a cult to Alexander, but he also belongs to us, the Illyrians, the Albanians. So they found a plaque in Skopje, the old city of Skopje, which existed like to the northwest of the current city, also along the Vardar River, but on a different hill. The city was destroyed by the earthquakes, by the was it the Gothic invasions, I think?
Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the teenage Goths.
Yeah. And we are excavating the place, but they found like a plaque which, I don't know what it says. It says at one place, Dardanus. So, some historians say this was probably a Roman period because it's in Latin, and it was probably an individual name of a person because there was no province called Dardania by this time. But the Albanians, even from this Alliance of Albanians party which joined the government, historian Albanians, politicians, they're up in arms. The journalists were there. They started shouting that the government is committing cultural genocide over the Albanians because they didn't immediately stop the construction. There was like a residential development in this part of the city, and where they found the plaque. So they want to destroy the evidence that Skopje is a Dardanian city, and by extension it means an Illyrian city, and by extension it means Albanian city, and the Slavic Macedonian.
And by extension, you should leave, or at least shut up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. Even people who would accuse the Macedonians, like over the period when Nikola Gruevski would seek to emphasize the ancient heritage of the Macedonians, that as a nation we derive from the ancient times, just like the Greeks do, just like every other nation here. People who even derided Gruevski as nationalist, primitive, ahistorical, and stuff like that, now they're pointing to the evidence, to the proof that, written in marble, who knows when. So, yeah, we have a lot of nationalism caused by the weakness of the Macedonian camp in the country.
Well, I think, and that's a very good analysis, but your last point there is critical, I think, caused by the weakness in the Macedonian camp. When I pointed to the far left Democrat mayor of Tucson, Regina Romero, who says that this land was historically Native American and we stole it. She's being, of course, performative, virtue signaling. Even if she literally believed that, and I don't think she does, there's nothing that could be done about it. And so she says it, again, it's virtue signaling. This is what far left Democrats and progressives do. Now, when it's done over there, it's a little bit different. And there might be some virtue signaling and performance involved because of who's saying it, but they literally mean it, and they literally want that territory. And that's not unique only in Macedonia and in southeastern Europe. It's throughout the planet because most countries are based on ethnic states as opposed to ideas like the United States. But anyway, okay, well, but again, going back to your last point there, it's the weakness of the current Macedonian government, which will do anything, including handing over the keys to the kingdom to the ethnic Albanian leadership there to stay in power, basically because they're corrupt and they want to keep, skimming off the top of various contracts and things like that, going back to Artan Grubi. So apparently one of the things he's involved in is what is it, the highway
to
right
Kosovo.
Yeah, exactly. So that's he's talking to Bechtel, which is a U.S. company. Of course, I'm sure that's a no-bid contract. And Bechtel, of course, has proven itself to be involved in various countries where the United States military has been, and it's quite lucrative. And then, of course, you've got Ali Ahmeti, his boss. Well, I don't even know who's the boss between Ali Ahmeti and Artan Grubi anymore, but he's involved and his family is involved in setting up new energy companies, and basically it's corruption. Macedonians know it. Polls point to it. And when I say Macedonians, I mean Macedonian citizens. Everybody knows in Macedonia, no matter what their class or ethnicity or anything else, knows that this government is absolutely corrupt. The U.S. government knows that this Macedonian government is totally corrupt. And yet they just keep doing it. You know, we had the U.S. ambassador announced famously last month, we're going on 4, 5, 6 months now, this team sanctions coming in. And very little has happened since then. If it seems like that was performance art as well.
Yeah, they stopped talking about this.
Yeah.
About fighting corrupt politicians.
Exactly, yeah. So
the corruption is really interesting here because the Alliance of Albanians party, which joined the government with its 8 seats, it was very anti-DUI, very opposition, very outspoken against DUI as a corrupt party. Its leader, Arben Taravari, was. And then it became known that he starts negotiating with DUI. He has the U.S. ambassador going to the city of Gostivar, where he's mayor every other day. Every other diplomat went there. And he's negotiating joining the government, propping up the government. At the same time, Vimera publishes information that he was gifted practically a house in downtown Skopje, in a very expensive part of a bit to the west from downtown, and also that his best man, who is now elected as healthcare minister, he also bought a house, but you know it's very dubious if they even gave any money. In this part of the city, houses which were bought by a huge businessman from DUI, a guy who would get major oil supply contracts from the government with the help of DUI, and is member of parliament through DUI, Ismail Yahoski, who was also mentioned as probably the main person that the U.S. embassy, the team sanctions, would go after. So now he practically gave 2 houses to the opposition, to the leader of a large opposition party, and the leader of the opposition party just forgets all about his previous criticism of DUI. He would accuse DUI about the fire in Tetovo, about the deadly bus tragedy which affected especially his city, Gostivar, the first bus accident. We had 2 major bus accidents under DUI in Albanian ran companies which had like a very lax approach to checking the vehicles. So yeah, this is a huge, example of corruption. I was actually joking with one of Taravari's supporters. I told him, listen, maybe you can try digging at your boss's, in the yard of your boss's new house. Maybe you find another Dardanian ancient plaque there. Maybe you get the deeds to your house from antiquity. And then at the same time, as you said, Artan Grubi from DUI, who is trying to keep pole position to remain Ali Ahmeti's successor in the party. He is in charge of building the highways from practically the east-west route from through Bechtel. Vimera began to work on this line very strongly, but through Chinese companies, because we couldn't get European funding, the EU funding, which every other Balkan country like Bulgaria, if you're in the EU, you get free money for this. We had to pay for this, and we didn't want to pay the US rates because it's 3 times more expensive when you do it through Bechtel. So we would do this through the Chinese for more favorable loans. And but this was all stopped under SDSM. But now Artan Grubi is negotiating a new deal with the US government, which will be the more expensive option without any EU support. So we have to pay 3 times more than usual. And they're extremely incompetent. They cannot complete the route to Ohrid, which is built through the Chinese contracts. They haven't started on the middle section, which should be solely Bechtel built. And they started building like 2 kilometers from the road, from the highway from Skopje to Kosovo, after Kosovo completed a very impressive highway from the border to Pristina. And they can't even complete these 2 kilometers. But what they did was Grubi got the construction company, which is building this small section, and is getting like 30 million for this. This company owned an old communist-style hotel on Popova Shapka above Tetovo in the ski resort. So they practically gifted it to a businessman very close to Artan Grubi. So this is what they can do. And they also had, Grubi's brother also bought some real estate in downtown Skopje. He's, again, giving like ridiculously low figures. So yeah, they're grazed in corruption. And the corrective parties, the Albanian opposition parties, which should be capitalizing on this, they have to be quiet because they're negotiating to join the government. They're getting a piece of the action or negotiating, getting a piece of the action. The U.S. embassy condones all this, and we're having a ridiculous level of corruption at the moment.
Well, and again, as I said, it's reflected in the polls, and yet, and of course, the U.S. embassy is we talked about team sanctions, and then nothing. It's kind of like, well, it's performative apparently. So,
yeah.
Well, and then let's go back and touch on what I started with in the intro there, the bread shortages. Sven, you sent me you in the back and forth on this before we started. You had sent me an email saying that you can't find bread, and I found that funny because I thought you were joking. And then I saw a picture that you posted on the Twitters, and literally no bread. And it's just kind of, this is Europe, folks. This is 2023, and there's bread shortages.
So the government, mishandled the energy sector. When they're not doing real estate deals, corrupt real estate deals, all the government officials are now involved in purchasing electricity from abroad, importing it into the country under inflated prices, as prices have gone sky high because of the war and because of their mishandling of domestic production. So the government is spending public funds from the budget to support household bills, but companies were left to fend for themselves. And this immediately translated into high food prices because, you have to mill the grains, then bake the bread. This requires electricity. So the government, a few months ago, it signed contracts with select companies from the food sector, and this was obviously a corrupt, crooked deal, which are producing basic staple foods. And the deal was, we give you cheaper electricity, you reduce the prices, we want this to see this affect the end price of the product. The prices went down slightly. The government insists they should have gone down more. The companies say, no, but look, it's the distribution. It requires oil. Oil is through the roof. Labor is through the roof because of your minimum wage increases. Everything is going up. So this is the best we can do. So the government pulls the energy subsidies and then orders the mill, the baker. How do you call it in English? A large industrial baking.
Yeah, it's the milling and the baking.
The bakers.
Yeah, the baker man.
Yeah,
baker man is baking bread.
Yes, those guys. So he told them, you will have to limit the price of bread. You have to reduce it by half. So they put a hard cap. I don't even know how they can legally do this. I guess through some form of COVID/energy crisis measures. So the government is mandating that the bread of a little under half a kilogram, like the typical loaf, it will have to be sold for no more than 33 dinars, which is half a euro, half a dollar. And it's almost half of what the price is now, the realistic price, the market price. And the company said, okay, you can mandate the price, but you can't force us to bake it. So they just stopped producing bread. So on Tuesday we had a run on bread. On Wednesday we had a run on flour. And in the smaller cities where you have like a small neighborhood bakery, which does not have transportation, family owned, so it doesn't have labor costs, they are following the law. But the large industrial companies which supply large cities like Skopje, Bitola, Titova, they shut down. And now you almost can't find baked bread in a supermarket. So now the government is issuing another order that the bakeries have to resume production at a volume of 80% of production they had, I don't know, 2 months ago or something like that. So now they're ordering them to start working at a loss. And this is like, I don't know, like
this
Atlas Shrugged stuff.
Yeah, exactly. This is insane. You know, listening to you as a free market, small government conservative, I'm just astounded that in 2023, in the middle of Europe, you've got a government dictating to private producers the price, literally the price of bread. I mean, it's just kind of, what is the government doing involved in this anyway? It's, to me, it's, you know, here we are 32 years after Macedonia declared independence, and the government is still mucking around in the private sector, literally dictating the price of bread. It's the hangover of communism times several factors, and it just doesn't seem to be going away. And that's because, as I said in the intro, SDSM, before 1991, the League of Communists of Macedonia, DUI, before 2001, before 2002, the National Liberation Army. You've got terrorists and communists running the government. What the hell do you expect to happen? It's exactly this. It's corruption. It is, to throw in the other sea, it is crime, of course, which we haven't talked about in quite some time, but crime is rampant. And it is this mucking around in the private sector, which the government has no business doing. Now, on the flip side, I'm hoping, and we keep talking about early elections. I don't think, as we get closer to what should be the date of normal elections, I think the talk of early elections kind of fades by necessity. But at least, for all of its sins and faults, VMRO is, at least on paper, is, you know, the free market conservative party in Macedonia. But man, I'm astounded that here we are in 2023 in Europe talking about a government dictating the price of bread in a European country. So
the communists actually seized from my family an industrial flour mill.
Wow.
So I'm actually looking very forward to seeing how this thing plays out this second round.
You want it back?
No, I just want to see this whole thing collapse this time.
Well, I mean, yes. Parents with young children, please turn away right now. Turn off the podcast. It isn't getting any better. So sorry.
But they're making money hand over fist. I mean, from the minimum wage laws subsidized by the government, from the mandate that supermarkets close on Sundays, normal stores close on Sundays. The supermarkets can remain open.
The supermarkets,
companies,
the supermarkets that are run by ethnic Albanian leadership can remain open on Sundays.
That too, yeah, that's also an issue. But we give subsidies to these companies for electricity, not to those. They would mandate during the corona the price of food, eggs. I thought this rule lapsed. This is why I was surprised this time. Then at one point they started mandating the margin of profit you can have. Yeah. All of this you can imagine is being done with backhanded negotiations and tipping off the importers, the producers. Go sell this now because the measure goes into effect tomorrow, stuff like that. So you can imagine that the government officials love this. Those who are in the know, who are making decisions. Not to mention the destroy your own energy producing sector and then start importing electricity abroad. This is all ridiculously lucrative for everybody involved. The prime minister has a company for producing solar panels, and so he's actually directly benefiting from the high level of high electricity prices, he has a personal incentive to have things continue to go bad. So yeah, it's it's ridiculous.
Well, and
They're
again,
robbing the country into the ground.
yeah, yeah, and of course, the old saying is "robbing the country blind," is the phrase. But I guarantee you, nobody's blind in this. Everybody sees what's going on, and again, it's reflected in the polls. And if this is marching towards EU membership, if it's the quote unquote European perspective that the government keeps talking about, which means you rubes, you peasants, you bitter clingers must support a change in the Constitution. If that's what all this means, then no wonder the polls show that there's a record low percent of Macedonians who support EU membership, and especially the demand from the churlish Albanians. I'm looking at one statistic here that among ethnic Macedonians, 80% reject the demand of the Bulgarians to change the constitution. So I don't know how, and of course, as we talked about in our last podcast, the whole reshuffle in the government was to bolster their numbers that, they could change the constitution. And they went from, I think in our last podcast, we said went from 64 to 64, but the actual number is actually 65. Sorry about that, folks. We guessed wrong on that. So it's actually a net plus one. So, but that's
not
still
low enough, if you ask me.
Yeah,
it
true.
Could go down.
Yeah, but they need 81, and so I'm not sure how that's. I guess it's going to take more Johannes Balkan Tactics Hahn to strong arm the other. Let's see, you need 16 more votes to get there. But
did you see what Han did with the casinos?
No.
Did you see that?
What?
You must have seen this.
Tell me.
The order to have not to close down the casinos in the country.
Yes, let's since we're talking about corruption let's talk about that.
Out of this world. So the Albanians, the Albanians are pushing for this mostly because some of their parties are like political Islam. They have our youth is being corrupted by gambling. And we really have the casinos opening like crazy. So it's not even funny.
So wait, let's take a step back. So there is a proliferation of casinos in Macedonia. Yeah. That is a fact. I mean,
slot machines, sports gambling, all sorts.
When I was there, it was a little over a month ago. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite little bakeries, all of a sudden overnight became a casino. Yeah. I think now I'm a free market conservative. I have a hard time dictating and saying that, casinos can't operate, etc. I'm kind of on the fence on that. But when it comes to restricting where they operate, basic zoning requirements, of course. You don't want a chemical producing factory next to a schoolyard for instance. So the issue is casinos next to schools, and some of the Albanian parties don't want casinos next to schools, correct?
Yes.
And I agree with them on that completely. Yeah. I mean, look, we have common ground here. But the Austrians who are in charge of these casinos, the companies that run these casinos, say, no, we want casinos popping up like proverbial mushrooms throughout the country, whether they're next to schools or not, right? And
Johannes Hahn was a gambling company executive before he became minister, and there was a lot of commissioner, and there was a lot of allegation during the Colored Revolution that his companies made a deal with Mjalkov, protection racket, or we let you operate in Macedonia without any problem. But if you support VMRO, this was widely reported in the pro-Colored Revolution SDSM press, and then when at one point Han quickly changed turn completely. Did a 180 and started to support SDSM, they forgot about his previous involvement with Austrian casino companies. But now the Austrian ambassador is sending a letter to the parliament telling them you cannot make this law because of administrative thing with the law. This is very important for us. You have to respect rule of law. This law, as proposed, cannot pass. If you want to join the EU, you have to respect the freedom of entrepreneurship. He does not protest the government regulating the price of bread, but he is protesting the government regulating that there is no casino or fast. There's also fast credit stores
easy
opening
credit,
up right
yes.
next to
quote
the
unquote
casino.
easy credit. Yes, just
crazy.
Yeah, just put down the title to your car or your home, and we'll
Yeah,
give you
yeah,
a quick loan here. So,
yeah.
well, that is, I mean, so you don't have to go back to say, oh, I don't know, 1933 to prove that nothing good comes out of Austria.
Yeah.
But again, look, people aren't stupid. People aren't blind. This is reflected again in the polls that you've got a corrupt government. You've got corruption in these EU member states and the EU itself, etc. And no wonder folks want to be left alone and left to their, their traditional ways. Now, granted, of course, if you do that, then you've got what we have with the current government. But if Kale, if the State Department, if the EU wasn't propping these people up, then you would get in there a free at least on paper, again, a free market conservative party running the show, and things I think would be better. Say what you want about Nikola Gruevski and Vomero during their 10 years in rule, but the economy was a hell of a lot better. And there was more pride, and things were moving in the right direction. And it wasn't, maybe Macedonia never would have gotten into the EU or even NATO then. But so what? I mean, it's not like it's bordering Russia, because it's not. It's I mean, anyway, you can make all these arguments all day
Well,
long.
we might soon. I mean, the way things are going.
Well, before that happens, I guarantee you the planet will end.
Yeah.
So it's just to throw in a really quick dark note. I do think the world is moving towards World War. So
Yeah, I think we're well within the first stage of the war.
Yeah. So.
And we have the EU acting like crazy with all these broken promises. Couldn't even come around to giving us some funding, but then rage on while we take Chinese funding. Couldn't come around investing in supporting a Balkan-wide energy infrastructure. Then raging once we turn to Russia for energy. So the EU is it's still very high, 65% support for EU membership. But then, as you said, there is 80% of ethnic Macedonians opposed to the deal with Bulgaria, which de facto means opposed to EU membership, because Bulgaria will continue to block us until we accept this constitutional amendment. And then we see the US even crazier, maybe, with the war on Russia. We see American politicians, the way they talk.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on that. I think we have
The
disagreements.
proxy
on that,
war on
so.
Russia, I don't know.
Well, anyway, we'll politely push that aside for now. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But going back to, I think you just gave us a title there. What was the 80s song? You gave me promises. I'll have to look that up. But,
I was going to go with Dardanian land acknowledgement.
well, that works too. Okay. Well, actually,
No shortage of
I did want to make a point on the land acknowledgement in Dardania and the Native American tribes here in southern Arizona, and that so following that logic, whoever the Dardanians were, and whichever Native American tribe happened to be here most recently, they were the only ones ever here, and they didn't take the land from anybody else. And of course, they all lived in this peaceful Rousseauian, noble savage, idyllic prelapsarian, Edenic state of being, and it was kumbaya and all that crap, which because it didn't exist. I mean, it's just kind of you want to go back and play that game, okay. We'll do that. So, anyway, all right. So back. Let's see. We were talking about the polls, and I think I went off on a side tangent there. And back on Bulgaria and the Constitution, which I touched on just briefly. So the fall, we're in March now, and it's the fall where this kind of decision has to be made. Bulgaria is not going to, of course. Okay, Bulgaria is not going to support Macedonia's membership in the EU. They will keep their effective veto if Macedonia doesn't change the constitution. Bulgaria has another election in early April, I think basically about a month from now. This will be, I think, the 5th in 2.5 years, something like that. But
Yeah,
no
stop
matter
counting.
what the makeup of the Bulgarian government, the new Bulgarian government is, which will probably lead to another election 6 months down the road, they're just not going to change their mind on that. That's kind of baked into the cake on this thing. And Macedonians, through these polls and opposition, don't want to change the constitution. So where do we go from there?
I'm a bit concerned about the Bulgarians. Their left was actually pretty nationalist. And in hindsight, I kind of like this. I mean, they sounded like a sane, like a normal country. You can see this in their economics, in their border management during the migrant crisis. Now they have a colored revolution, colorful, how should we call it, new left, liberal democratic left party being built with a lot of help from the US Embassy in the form of the PP party and the DB parties, which just came out of nowhere and have supplanted the old left, and they're taking the urban vote in Sofia and the other large cities on an anti-corruption platform. We've seen this in Macedonia, and we are reaping the benefits of this political engineering. And they're going to be kind of like tied with the populist right-wing party, but I'm concerned that they may be pushed by the embassies to form a coalition with the Turkish part. So like here we have the rulers of a colorful, liberal, democratic, post-national
Post-human,
party with
post-national,
the
post-Christian,
Albanians.
post-human,
Yeah, post-modern.
post-post.
With the Albanians, with disastrous consequences, they might do the same. And this coalition might be marginally more open to Macedonia making concessions. On the other hand, we saw them in power for like 6-9 months, and we saw them align with the US a lot on Ukraine, and then they leveraged this to make a deal which was very favorable to Bulgaria, very unfavorable to Macedonia on the national issues. So, it could actually happen that if they're the darlings of the US, because they're exporting 155 millimeter grenades to Ukraine and diesel, that they will get an excellent deal on Macedonia. At the same time, Serbia is angling to make a deal on Macedonia with its strategic reorientation toward the West. So these two countries are competing, practically going to the Americans, telling them, listen, we will join you more, we will fight Russian influence in our borders, but what do we get out of it? And we are on the table, we are not, we are on the menu, we are not sitting at the table now as a country. And then the polls show that VMRO is beating SDSM easily, but then SDSM no longer wants to compete on its own. They want DUI, they want this newly acquired AA party, which they bought with 2 houses in Skopje, to join SDSM in pre-election coalition. So this would be the first time they would have a large Albanian partner pre-election, not post-election. So they could get close to VMRO. Now, this could mean that if they come with a list which is half Macedonian, half Albanian, SDSM's remaining Macedonian support evaporates, and the Albanians continue to lose the protest vote, the poor, the people who are angry with the way their own community is going with their economics. Like now, they're losing. They have a faction in DUI. They have Albanian parties joining, but also leaving the coalition. Those who leave the coalition gain in popularity. We see this in Besa. So this could backfire on them. But then with a lot of pressure from the US Embassy, with tactical arrests of VMRO people before the elections, with some new state of crisis in the country, they could have an even result with VMRO, even slightly beating VMRO. So this is their plan for the next 4 years. They still wouldn't have 80%, 80 votes in parliament to amend the constitution. So VMRO is negotiating on this. They're saying we want guarantees from Bulgaria, but also early elections. Before maybe there is talk of maybe a suspended constitutional change. So we vote on this with the Vimera votes. Vimera gets early elections, a fair election, in which they have a chance to win. But the changes to the constitution go into effect only after Bulgaria lets us join the EU.
Right.
So that's one option. Another option is that, what was the other option, sorry? That we have a referendum on the constitutional change, again, yes, along with early elections.
Sorry.
So, yeah, there are a lot of plans going around how to remove this cancer on the country, and what to do with Bulgaria, not to destroy relations with them too much, but I don't know, it's also
Not too
so
much, just a little.
complicated.
So,
Yeah. Oh, they're bad. Relations
Yeah.
are pretty bad now, but how worse they can get is the question.
well, you could start a war. So that'd be a first time to see two NATO members go to war. So
Yeah.
there's always that. No matter
Well,
look,
Greece and Turkey fought over Cyprus.
yeah. Well, don't forget. No matter how bad it is, it can always get worse. So.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think
Here's to that.
Yeah. So one of those polls that we were talking about, I think, said that the majority of Macedonia. Well, I don't know if it's the majority. It's a third. No, that's let's see. I'm looking here at different numbers. Yada yada yada. Bulgaria is the most disliked country. Well, Serbs are the most loved. That's interesting. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 20.
We're about to go to Serbia, cap in hand, begging them for bread. They actually sent us grains at the start of the crisis, then vaccines. Now it's very likely they start delivering bread to Skopje.
Well, if the United States was right next to Macedonia, you could clandestinely, smuggle eggs over the border here, and I could clandestinely smuggle bread over the border to you. But actually, the price of eggs has actually gone down, thankfully. So.
Yeah, really?
So, yeah, fortunately, it's been a long time coming, but and I eat a lot of eggs. But anyway,
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see here. I think that's a full wrap. I got to get to the office. I have a day job. You have a day job too, but it's late afternoon.
Yes, and I have to go in line for the bread. I remember those years when, at the collapse of communism, I would go in line. My father would go to buy milk in plastic bags, as it was sold at the time.
Wow.
As it was fashion at the time.
Wow. Well,
And
Americans listening to this, don't get too smug. It might come here too at some point. So if you keep voting for the bloody Democrats. Anyway, all right. That's a good way to end on a laugh. And well, I don't know if that was a laugh. It was a laugh, and then it was a sour note.
laugh.
So it's crushing morosity, as John Podhoretz says on the commentary podcast.
yeah.
We'll check in with each other in a week or two and see where we are next time. See if you've got more. You've got bread back on the shelves.
I don't even eat bread that much, honestly.
Yeah, actually,
but,
I don't. Yeah, but most people do. I mean, it's throughout all of history and throughout all nations, societies, peoples. It's bread. Our daily bread is the most important staple product to keep people alive. So yeah, that is important. We'll end on a sober note there. So
Yes.
all right.
Okay, buddy.
Yep. Good talking to you.
Yeah, till next time. Take care.